Good morning and welcome to the NAI Hansen Zoomcast. I'm Kristen Jost, your moderator. I would like to welcome our hosts, Andrew Sample and Justin Alessio, and we welcome Matthew Wolf, Assistant Vice President of Land Associates, Tom Leghard, Vice President of Land Associates, and Jamie Patriarca, Facilities Manager of Suez North America. Today's discussion will be on reopening a healthier workplace. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A box. Thank you for joining us, and I will now turn it over to Andrew.
Thanks, Kristen. I would like to thank all the webinar attendees and panelists for participating in today's event. At the end of May, I participated in another webinar with Commerce and Industry Association of New Jersey. The subject matter was how COVID-19 is affecting the suburban office market, and I said at the time we were in the third chapter of a long story. At this point, as businesses and commercial properties have begun to reopen, I think we're now in the middle chapters of the same long story. From the middle of March till now, most of us were trying to find the right answers and solutions on how to manage the shutdown due to the pandemic and how our companies could reopen in a safe and healthy environment. With the information we are to discuss today, I believe we have some of those answers and solutions. I would like to introduce the panelists and my associate, Justin Alessio, who will be asking some of the questions. Matt is a registered architect with over 15 years of experience. A long-standing focus for Matt has been the adaptive reuse of hospitality projects and sustainability. Joining Land Associates over a year and a half ago, Matt currently heads up the NJ architectural team, focusing on education, mixed use, and commercial projects. Tom is a principal of the company. He is responsible for the management of the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing departments at Land. Tom has over 18 years of experience in the industry and has been involved with numerous projects for both new construction and renovation projects. Jamie has been in the facility and property management industry for over 20 years. She has been working with Suez North America for 6.5 years while managing the corporate office space and capital improvements for the local Suez sites. Jamie and I worked together on Suez corporate relocation from Harrington Park to Paramus, as well as the subsequent sale of the Harrington Park property. Matt and Tom, earlier this month, Land Associates created a brochure labeled "Your Building and COVID-19 Working Together to Reopen a Healthier Built Environment." Based upon my many conversations with clients about this matter and the efforts needed to incorporate the proper safety protocols within their facilities, I thought it would be ideal subject matter to host a webinar. The Land brochure provides a comprehensive guide on how offices, commercial properties, and public facilities can reopen with instituted guidelines to protect employees and customers. Then, during a separate conversation with Jamie, she was describing her efforts to reopen Suez corporate offices in Paramus. Based upon what she has done, I thought she would be an ideal panelist to provide her thoughts and experiences on the matter. So let's get started. Matt, can you provide some background and the insights that went into the brochure?
Absolutely. First, I want to thank you, Andrew and Justin and the NAI team for hosting us today. Appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit of our research and some of our thoughts as as we all wrestle through what the new normal looks like. Anyway, just real quick, you can go to the next slide. As Andrew mentioned, I'm an architect with Land Associates. My colleague Tom is a director of engineering. And as a firm, we've been practicing over 55 years in this region. Very diverse practice as a full service architecture engineering firm. I've done a wide variety of corporate, commercial, industrial, multifamily, educational, some mixed use, some churches, real diverse practice all throughout the region. And, we like to think of ourselves as collaborators, and our ultimate goal working with our clients is to become their trusted advisor. That's really something that guides us. And as we were thinking through the whole COVID, pandemic and hearing all the research, the articles, guidelines from the CDC, World Health Organization, ASHRAE, industry, organizations like the American Institute of Architects. There's other trade organizations for engineering, mechanical and professional plumbing engineers. We're hearing guidance from the state The state just issued guidelines to reopen schools in the fall. I think that came out last Thursday. And then even just local health department guidelines. There's a lot of noise, a lot of information. A lot of our clients are saying, where do we start? Is it the CDC? Is it the state? Where do we begin? So as a courtesy, and I think as more as an opportunity to support our clients, we looked at how can we help distill some of this information down? How can we consolidate it and bring it together in a manner that's a little more digestible? So over the course of the last few months, we've been working on developing a brief white paper, taking a lot of these guidelines, a lot of this information, and packaging it together into a manner that we can share with our clients and folks like you. So the first thing we published, the first white paper, was on working together to reopen a healthier built environment. This is more overarching guidance. Again, not being a trade organization or a national organization that's focusing on pandemics or health. We definitely make reference to the CDC, to ASHRAE, and other industry organizations. We're not experts at the science side, but we are experts at the built environment side. So a lot of our recommendations are, again, taking cues and insight from a lot of the trade organizations, and bringing some, personal, I guess, more professional insight from our point of view. The first white paper really overarches all industries and all building types, whether it's commercial, industrial, education, or private offices. Really good overarching guidance. And then one of our core business lines at our firm is we do a lot of educational work, K through 12 and higher ed. And we saw that as more of a nuanced niche type aspect, dealing with younger age students, the aspects of health and safety and wellness, nurse's office, how do you triage students, multiple students with temperatures. There's a little more detailed approach there. So we actually published a Designing Your School's Response to COVID-19 white paper as well. So this was really, I guess, the catalyst for this discussion today. You can go to the next slide. And briefly, I'm going to talk to you on some of the recommendations that came up that we've been seeing from an architectural point of view, as a building manager, facilities director, an owner operator. These are some things. There may be some things you've heard already, and also some new things in here. So I'll walk us through briefly, and then pass it over to Tom, and he'll talk on the mechanical and plumbing point of view. So as far as the immediate concerns, everyone's asking, what is the bare minimum I need to do to get back into my office, my workspace? I think a lot of us have been to the food store in the last few months. You're seeing, plexiglass shields at the registers. You're seeing face masks. You're seeing tape on the floor, directional arrows, encouraging people to, go in the same direction and guide you through the store to limit, crossing traffic. A lot of those recommendations apply directly to the workplace. We're seeing very similar recommendations, hand sanitizing, stations, temperature checkpoints. I believe there's, some new technology for temperature kiosks, and some other clients have been asking about facial recognition and temperature kiosks. And, definitely a lot of new technology coming out there. But the main theme that we're seeing for the immediate kind of phase of re-entering the workforce is, low cost investment. What's the bare minimum I need to do to get back in to keep our employees safe and healthy and comfortable? So one of the common topics we're seeing is that most companies, even from the CDC, is recommending that you develop a task force or a group, leadership group, to really assess, evaluate, and pull together the revised policy and procedures for bringing your staff back in. As a director of a department and a leader in our firm, we just welcomed back reopened the doors about 2 weeks ago. I think out of our 100 employees, barely 10% were comfortable coming back in. So we're wrestling through this in real time. But with that whole evaluation of your facility, you're looking at all the touch points, how to maintain sanitary surfaces. You're looking at bathrooms. Can you go touchless and hands-free, with all the plumbing fixtures, the paper towel dispensers, door operators. There's some great technology we've been implementing on recent projects that are hands-free door operators. Looking beyond the built environment, there's also aspects of the whole digital work from home dynamic. Is your office infrastructure, your networks, technology able to facilitate all that internet traffic and new burdens? So that aspect of your company infrastructure needs to be looked at as well. Again, a low cost solution for reducing density and occupancy in your office is maybe you're not changing the seating layout just yet. That we'd recommend more of a midterm solution, but you could go to every other seat. We're seeing that done a lot to reduce the distance or increase the distance between staff members. That applies easily for bathrooms as well. Maybe it's every other stall, every other sink. But again, the theme with your midterm kind of immediate phase is really looking at the low cost solutions on how to reopen, keeping your employees safe and healthy. Moving on to near term and more midterm considerations, this is where you want to start to look a little bit more at the structural layout of your space, whether it be a industrial, warehouse, or an office environment. I think looking at your seating layout makes a lot of sense. How dense do you want your staff sitting? What is their comfort levels? A term we use in the office design world is bench seating. Every 4 to 5 feet you can have a person sitting in a workstation. That density isn't welcoming or doesn't really meet that 6-foot guideline. So how do we space people apart more? How do we not have them facing each other? Do you put shields in between workstations? Do you just spread them apart? These are a lot of the discussions and trends that we're seeing right now. So the seating layout definitely should be evaluated and really, thoughtfully evaluated. Another fun idea that we've been seeing throughout the years, but could be helpful. A lot of the common areas we're seeing are being shut down. Your lunchrooms, large conference rooms, small teaming rooms. That sense of community is something we don't want to lose. So how do we bring back communal spaces in a healthy manner? One short-term solution is, well, maybe your meetings don't need to be in conference rooms. Maybe they could be standing meetings, less than 10 people in a large lobby or larger space in the office. What's nice about standing meetings is it keeps you accountable. You're not going to keep running longer and longer with the meeting. Keeps you on your toes. So that could be a healthier kind of fun way to keep people in an open area and limit the lengths of larger, moderately sized group meetings. Some other technology, as we're looking at the midterm retrofits and considerations to get back into your space, could be looking at UV light technology. There's a lot of UV light. There's a specific type of UV light. It's UVC that's used to disinfect surfaces. Tom may touch on it later as far as how that's integrated into engineering systems, building systems. But from a disinfectant point of view, there are light fixtures that incorporate UV light. There's a lot of new technology around this as it applies to schools and office settings, but this technology actually has been used in the healthcare world for quite some time. There is consideration, UV light can be harmful to people and students, so you don't want it to be on when it's occupied. But there is technology that's out there and available for disinfecting surfaces using UV light. Another aspect as we're looking at minor retrofitting of spaces is what kind of surfaces and materials are you putting into your space? Are they resistant to chemicals, a lot of cleaning and disinfecting? Some of the research we've seen, some materials are more resistant and have some inherent antimicrobial features to it. I think copper, not that we want to have copper surfaces everywhere, but some of the research has shown that copper actually has, it actually kills or has some inherent properties where the COVID, virus doesn't survive as long on copper surfaces as a stainless steel or plastic laminate surface. So there's definitely some new materials out there that, and old ones that we want to look at. But that's just something to keep in mind. And then moving on to more long-term planning, some of our corporate clients are still very reluctant, or many of them are very reluctant to look at their building footprint. Do we expand to spread out the seats? Do we take over more real estate, or do we shrink? It's still a very relevant, hot topic as we're looking for, forward 3, 6, 9, 12 months from now. But there's, I think, two sides of that discussion, with the work from home policies being revamped and people getting more comfortable doing Zoom meetings and web-based collaboration. What is the office of the future and the square footage requirements going to look like moving forward? Can we shrink our office footprint a little bit, or do we really want to have people in the office? And if so, do they want to be further apart? So I think that's very much a topic that we're actively talking through, working through. As I mentioned before about touchless technology, hands-free door operators. There's also other technology for voice-activated controls, RFID controls using your cell phone. There's a lot of new technology coming out that could help an employee or a visitor to operate and function through your facility without having to touch and engage many of the surfaces. So that's something we would talk through and just recommend looking into as we look at the long-term reinventing opportunities of what your workplace could look like in the future. Like I mentioned before, the whole open office, open plan trend, we've seen for many years now. There's been a lot of discussion in the last 2 years. Is it good? Is it bad? Is the open plan more distracting and not as meaningful as everyone thought it would be? Well, here we are dealing with this pandemic. Are people even comfortable sitting in an open plan? If someone sneezes, is that, affecting people 2, 3 workstations away? I think that pendulum is going to swing back somewhere in the middle. I don't think we're going to have all enclosed offices moving forward, but somewhere in the middle, our workstation's going to have, slightly taller partitions on them. Are they going to be spread out a little bit more? I think there's going to be a hybrid solution as we move into the future of more of a right-sized kind of open to closed ratio. Again, as you look at you reinventing and creating this new normal for your workplace, I think a lot of these topics of density, spacing apart of workstations, what do the common areas look like? How can we usher staff in and foster a healthy kind of well environment? Another trend we've seen is the whole well-being and wellness trend. In education sector, office sector, there's a building certification called WELL certification, and the whole topic of wellness has been really picking up momentum. So that's just another avenue of kind of helping foster a more comforting or welcoming environment. Is there indoor and outdoor space we can dedicate to wellness activities, whether it be meditation or just a timeout or an outdoor patio? I think some of those aspects could also help complement this new kind of reinvention of the workplace. So that briefly is just, a high level kind of summary and highlight of some of the immediate, midterm, and long-term trends that we're seeing. Again, based on some of the CDC guidelines, based on some of the AIA and ASHRAE guidelines.
All right, thank you, Matt. Would you say you're seeing any differences in what it takes to reopen public facilities, schools, places of worship versus commercial offices?
Yeah, good question, Justin. Absolutely. As we think of the public coming in as a visitor into your facility, whether it's an office, a school, or a church, that is a very real topic of, are we comfortable welcoming in, God knows who, and how far into your facility are they welcome to come in? At schools, I was walking a facility 2 weeks ago, and the idea is that no visitors are allowed past the vestibule right now. We're looking to install transaction windows into the vestibules. This way visitors could come in up to a certain point, have a visual eye-to-eye conversation through a plexiglass shield, one for security, but two for, you know, just well-being and just limiting the amount of outside visitors coming in with potential, you know, ailments or fever. You know, you look at an office, again, the whole idea of, you know, taking a temperature, wearing a mask, having some sort of checkpoint coming into your building is a very real expectation right now, but are visitors welcomed in? I think each building type has its own nuances and they function differently. So it's certainly a case by case basis, but yeah, it's, you know, there's a lot of broad recommendations that apply to every building type and facility owner and manager. But then there's those nuances and specialty features that I think are case by case.
Sure, sure. Thank you, Matt. Great perspective, very insightful. Tom, could you maybe pick up on the mechanical challenges of the built environment around reopening?
Absolutely. I'm going to touch on a little bit more pointed topics with the your specific plumbing systems and your HVAC systems in the buildings. What's the recent recommendations have been on that. First, the biggest issue a lot of the building owners are dealing with is these buildings have been sit idle for 3-4 months, or if they haven't been idle, they've been very minimally used. With social distancing, some areas of buildings have been not used just in an attempt to kind of keep people in one area or not cross-contaminate. So on the plumbing side and your building's water side, the biggest recommendation, and it's something fairly easy to handle, is just flush your buildings have been sitting idle. Pipes that are left sitting have a tendency to build up some scale, some microbial growth, heavy metals, things like that. Hot water, your heating systems. Hopefully, you've left your water heater running. Some companies have shut things down. But hot water that tends to cool off, you may have some potential for Legionella growth or other similar. So, the biggest recommendation before you start bringing people back, or as you start reopening certain sections of buildings, is really purge your system. Remove aerators. It's all kind of spelled out here. I don't want to read this slide, but remove all the aerators, but make sure you run every faucet, every toilet, every water filter, every ice machine, any point of use that you may have in your building. Make sure you remove the strainers or filters and just run through the system for a few minutes to make sure you have utility supply into your whole facility. There are some more detailed documents on that. We have some links later on that can help you out with how to flush and proper times to flush your system. The biggest concern right now with reopening, these idle buildings. Touched on before, and I believe Jamie's going to touch on later. Upgrade to touchless fixtures, hands-free faucets, flush valves, door towel dispensers. Kind of really quick and easy fix just to minimize or eliminate cross-contamination on surfaces. And disinfecting every night is a great step, but during those 8-10 hours a day, the less points of contact you have, the better. So that's really a high level on what we should be looking at for your plumbing systems, is really just make sure you flow all sources of water. A little bit more tricky is your HVAC system. We have 2 lists of recommendations here, kind of a building operations and control system, and then later, some you can add to better treat your systems. The biggest recommendation currently is just fresh air. Obviously, we're all allowed to congregate more outdoors than we are indoors, if at all indoors. I know the governor just postponed dining indoors again for another week or 2. I think it was unforeseen, but we are opening outdoors because the fresh air is able to dilute any contaminants versus in the air. So same recommendations hold true for your building. Ventilating, pre-purging your building if possible. If you controls or the capable to do it, run 100% outside air when the outdoor conditions are possible. It's really just purging the building. If it's tougher to maintain temperature and humidity with all that outside air, just pre-purge before occupants get there. Just kind of get a full breath of fresh air in your building. Better term there, but some of the other requirements, maintain temperature and humidity in your space. More importantly, humidity, maintaining between 40 and 60%. Really decreases the virus's survivability. So I know a lot of buildings have an automatic setback inner temperature. So 6 o'clock at night, this time of year, now that we're in cooling, your temperature is going to step back to 75, 80 degrees when there's no occupants there. And then in the morning, as people start to come back in, the temperature comes back to, the occupants at that point, which is in the, low 70s, 72. Really, you want to maintain temperature in your building 24/7 to maintain that humidity to minimize the virus survivability and transmissibility. Speaking, Matt touched on well and lead, and there's been a big push for energy conservation and energy recovery and demand control ventilation to reduce this outside air. We're kind of going 180 degrees from a lot of those recommendations. If your system does have energy recovery in the system, it's recommended to bypass that so we can bring in the fresh air. Similar demand control ventilation, which with the calculate the amount of outside air you bring in based on the amount of people. So if you have that in place right now, with the low occupancy level most offices are seeing, you're going to bring in a minimal amount of outside air. So recommended to disable that type of technology so we're able to bring in more air. With all this outdoor air we're bringing in, you want to make sure it doesn't become too humid. Obviously we want to stay within that 40 to 60 or uncomfortable. So as much as possible before it becomes problematic. And somebody can take a look at systems and see what the best are you have, whatever equipment you have in place. Now, some of the down the road solutions, or some solutions that to add on to your existing system. Everybody's talking about replacing filters, increasing your efficiency from MERV 8. So that's your filter efficiency from, and MERV 8 is a standard filter. Increasing from MERV 13, which is great. You're going to capture more particulate in the air. However, higher MERV ratings do come with a higher pressure drop, and that may be detrimental to your supply fans and supply air throughout your building. So that should really be looked at before you just go out and replace a MERV 8 with a 13 or 15 filter. There's some other solutions like UVC. Matt mentioned UVC is a good solution for treating surfaces. There's wheel in to treat all the surfaces and spaces, and there's recommendations for number of square feet and number of time, amount of time to treat with the UVC. But the same type of technology can be applied to your air handling equipment as well to treat oils, to reduce microbial growth, and also treat the air as it passes over the UVC. Another technology that's been gaining a lot of traction lately is the bipolar ionization. Same type of air treatment as UVC, and will kill viruses and bacteria in the air. Bipolar also treats some other pathogens, mold, fungus, allergens, VOCs, odors in the air. Push, when it first hit the market, was actually to reduce the amount of outside air to increase efficiency and consumption. But it's now being used to just treat all the air in the building and further treat that outside air to any of the pathogens that may be in the airstream. Manufacturer has come out with some literature that actually combining a standard MERV 8 filter with their bipolar ionization unit, MERV 8 to essentially the same efficiency of a MERV 13. So you're getting the benefits of that higher efficiency without the reduced capacity on your fan. Really no additional power feed or anything. It's a pretty simple system to add air handling system. The third bullet on there is a newer type of technology, displacement ventilation. It's been around for a little while, but I'm getting a grasp in some industries. But it's really, you're not going to do that for a minor renovation, or you're not going to do that for replacing any of your existing equipment. This is more of a large scale renovation or brand new construction. Is traditional HVAC and what you have in your buildings, and you see your diffuser over your head. The way they operate is they fully mix all the air in a space. Fully mixing all the air, you're fully mixing any viruses, bacteria, colds. Somebody next to you sneezed, it's now fully being mixed in all that air that you're sharing. The displacement ventilation is an order. What that does is brings all the air in low across the floor. It'll use sources of heat in the room, like your body heat or computers or any other source of heat. That air rise up over the person, and then it gets exhausted high. So the system, there's no mixing of the air. Everybody's stays self-contained to that person, and it gets brought in high and exhausted, brought in low and exhausted up high. So there is no mixing of the air like a traditional system. Less cases of building or occupants calling out sick with that type of a system. Those are kind of just the high-level recommendations for what we have on the plumbing and HVAC right now. Things are changing, and ASHRAE, ASPE, IAPMO, everybody's CDC, everybody's coming out with new recommendations as information is out there. But the next slide is a couple links we can share with you after the seminar here. That dive into each of these a little bit further.
Tom, could you maybe describe any active construction jobs where you're seeing HVAC and other mechanical capital investment solutions to COVID-19 being implemented?
As we kind of touched on a little bit early this morning, I've got a crew here today installing bipolar ionization into our offices here in our New Jersey office. As we have a lot of jobs out either bidding or recently awarded construction, all this information comes out, we're getting more either contractors or owners asking us about this technology or different types of technology, and we're either adding it in the final phase of design if we can catch it, or we're even adding it as a last minute change before it's all ordered. A lot of this equipment can be added onto existing systems. It doesn't have to come to a new system. They're kind of plug and play bolt-on pieces. So it's been added. Like I said, more information and more people are being exposed to this information. We're getting more and more requests for.
Understood. Thank you, Tom. Quite comprehensive, to say the least. A lot to consider. Jamie, could you bring us up to speed on the human resource considerations to reopening?
Sure. I do see here that there is a question that popped up. I think this is a combination question, so maybe we could answer this before I continue on. It comes from a Michael Turner. He represents a number of building services and product suppliers and manufacturers. There's an inconsistency of applications recommended by experts, quote unquote, that have resulted in confusion by building owners and building services regarding what to deploy in high traffic areas and populated buildings. What are you seeing as the most effective products and procedures? Now, I could touch on it on behalf of being a property and facility manager, but maybe Matt or Tom, you could touch on it more on the engineering field of it or architectural. There is no right or wrong product to use. I can tell you for my purposes of it, I've definitely been on a lot of webinars to try to figure out what would be the right process or what would be the right tactic to use in the high traffic areas. And being able to go on different webinars such as this one and getting some feedback from what we're doing collectively or local businesses is actually the best way to create your own product or procedure. With regards to common areas for Suez, which I'll touch on, we definitely removed a lot of furniture because they are saying that couches and anything with fabric on it has more of a high factor in being able to hold the COVID to be able to contract to others. So we did remove that. So it really is more of a to each his own. So Matt, Tom, if you want to touch on that as well, and then that way we can move on.
I think from an architectural point of view, I prefer not to comment on products. That's not really my expertise. And then procedurally, I think it's more of a building system recommendation that kind of falls in the mechanical realm. Much of what I think Tom touched on as far as filtration, purging, flushing out your buildings. But yeah, a lot of the products and procedures, I think, comes down to more of a facility operations point of view, which I defer to Jamie on.
Yeah, okay. All right, so hopefully that touches and answers your question, Michael. So I'll continue. Here at Suez, if you're not familiar with Suez, we are a water company. We handle water and wastewater systems. Our name was formerly known as United Water. We do have a presence throughout Suez, North America, and Canada. The main focus here that I'm going to talk about is our Paramus office, which is our corporate office. And then we do touch on some of the local sites, which is our essential and some of our non-essential employees. Our biggest goal at Suez is to maintain the health and safety of our employees. What we did is we created a task force that consisted of human resources, the facility department, and our environmental health and safety division. From there, we went to a lot of different resources, some of which Tom and Matthew touched on. We have the CDC. We reached out to local real estate management firms, local businesses in the area, and then of course, what everybody seems to be looking at on a day-to-day basis is the local news. We then created a risk assessment and a de-escalation plan on all the threat levels. And like I said, we do have a presence all over. So a lot of our risk assessments and our de-escalation plans actually are more site-specific because we have owned and leased properties. And then of course we have our essential and non-essential employees. And I will show you a sample of each one of those as we continue on. What Suez did here was we actually created a hygiene rules. We have 10 hygiene rules. Basically more of a general prevention and barrier measures, just consisting of stuff that we do on a daily basis. Making sure that we're wearing a mask properly, making sure that if we sneeze, we're sneezing in a disposable tissue or in the crook of our elbow, making sure that if we do have any symptoms that we are staying home and we're not bringing it out to the field where we can contaminate others. It's very generic. We have it posted all over our sites. One of the other things that we did, of course, with everybody else, we had to reevaluate and rather immediately our telecommute policy. During COVID, when everybody was forced to go home, we had to really look at our telecommute policy, both immediate and long-term, and to see where we are and where we can stand in the long-term future as well. This also impacts our space needs, which I'll discuss a little bit later in the presentation. We did have a coordination effort being in a Paramus and a leased facility, standards and entering the building. Our landlord is Onyx Equities. We did have to discuss with them on a lot of different new procedures. Like every place that you go to now, it's mandatory to wear a mask coming in and out of the building. When you are going into the elevator cabs, it's 2 people per elevator cab, obviously social distancing yourselves. The visitor policy and our check-in procedures have definitely changed. Anybody that has a visitor coming in, they are not allowed to come in that day. You have to actually check in with security, and we have to provide a list to them 24 hours in advance. Catering, which was huge. Catering services, anybody that had catering services, you had to deliver it to the office. You were actually able to share the catering when you were done with your meeting if there was any left over. That's not allowed anymore. That's more what we consider to be more communal now. Anything that's catered has to be wrapped individually, or if it's able to be wrapped whole, it has to be wrapped whole and delivered down to our lobby area for us to be able to go down and pick that up. We do have dedicated staircases for those that like to use the staircases, one for up and one for down, obviously. And packages. Suez did understand employees were at work all the time. They were able to have personal packages delivered here. That's no longer happening. And any kind of large packages, which we do have here, our FedEx, our DHL, even our mail, it gets delivered downstairs to the lobby. And again, we have to go downstairs and pick that up. Standards moving into the space. Again, this is very more to each his own. I've been on a lot of webinars. I went to a lot of resources, the CDC, speaking with engineers, speaking with local management firms. These are things that we decided collectively as a task force and what we are going to initiate within our space. Every day, all of our employees throughout Suez, North America, we actually get an email, 5 a.m. in the morning, and basically that asks you that you have to take a survey, whether you're coming into the office, whether you're taking a vacation day, if you're sick, if you have COVID, everything is all confidential. You fill out that survey appropriately, and you need to fill out that survey prior to coming into office that day. Otherwise, you're not going to be allowed in. We installed a temperature kiosk similar to what Matthew discussed. This temperature kiosk is for all outside visitors that come in. They actually have to answer a questionnaire, and they have to take their temperature when they're coming into the space. It's not just for the visitors, it's for any employees that aren't feeling well or they want to come in and do a double temperature check. They're more than welcome to do that as well. Plexiglass. Nobody knew that plexiglass would skyrocket in the industry, but it has with COVID. We installed barriers at our reception area and some high profile areas, our touchdown stations. Plexiglass was a 4 to 6 week lead time for us. So to be able to know what you want and to put in that order before it comes in and before you actually return to work is actually key. Additional cleaning. I can't even begin to talk about all the additional cleaning, high traffic areas, high touch areas. What we did was to spin off of it a flow of traffic. Instead of having to pull a handle open, like similar to what Matthew touched on, we unfortunately have a lot of stainless steel here. Stainless steel is the high factor where the germs are spread mostly. So our new flow of traffic actually pushes where you can either push the door open, which we then created, and we actually provided people with something called a cootie key. Very simple. You can get it on Amazon. You can get it anywhere. It's actually very cheap. This is used, you could use this for ATMs. You could use this for the elevator cabs, pushing doors open, pulling doors open. You could even use this in the supermarket. So this is a very handy tool that we provided to employees prior to them coming in as more of a welcome package for them. Like I mentioned earlier, we removed a lot of furniture, couches, chairs, making everything more socially distanced if you're bringing your lunch in and you need to eat in our small pantry area. A lot of chairs have been removed. We actually dedicated a conference room just for all the inventory of furniture that we have. Signage. You can't have too much signage in a space. Between spot markers that we put on the floor, social distance signs, revising our occupancy in all of our conference rooms. We even used some of the CDC resources and printed out some 24 by 36 poster boards to hang on walls in 4 to 5 different areas of our facility, basically reminding you how to prevent the spread of the germ, how to wash our hands, what's considered high risk, because we are seeing more and more symptoms are coming up, what's considered high risk, and percentages as well. In the restrooms, again, both Tom and Matt talked about this, touchless faucets and hand dryers. We are very fortunate in the fact that we've actually updated our space in the last 5 to 6 years. That's already been here, so we didn't have to touch that at all. We did install a sanitary door opener and a step and pull for the restroom doors for those people that don't want to touch the handle. And we marked off every other sink. So it's socially distanced and dedicated a sink for those people that have good hygiene and actually want to brush their teeth. From there, we created a training. It's a 40-page slide PowerPoint presentation with space, with new protocols, something simple as how to properly put on a mask, because sometimes you see people that have their mask hanging below their chin, they're not properly wearing it. So here we decided to put really in detail and go over the proper use on how to wash your hands for 20 seconds. If you're like me and you have young children, you got to distill in them how to be able to properly wash their hands. So you're constantly singing different songs in your head to make sure that they got that 20-second marker on there. Prior to that training, our biggest thing that we did was getting the comfort level of the employees on how they felt with returning to work. We did this question before, and we did the question after the training. Before the training, I can tell you that nobody or not many people at all were comfortable with returning to work. But after looking and after viewing the training and realizing how much protocols and procedures have put into place, and of course, the proper use of signage and indicators on the floor, people were a 50-50 split. They felt a little bit more comfortable coming back to the building. And then you get your group that is very hesitant and they don't want to leave their house. We did, prior to coming into the space, we actually asked volunteers as ambassadors to come in, walk the space, be able to create a checklist on anything and anything that we missed. Having a fresh pair of eyes other than their task force is the best use for you to be able to implement any new protocols. So we did that for the first week. And then, of course, creating frequently asked questions. Again, a couple pages of frequently asked questions for those people that want to know answers. We created that. We posted it on our resource page. And the highest question is how do you, if somebody were to have symptoms of COVID or be tested and tested positive for COVID, what do you do? And of course, there are guidelines and there are procedures that we have to abide by, which we will do that as well. From there, we actually established a phased list of employees. We did start last week as a whole, about 25 people as our first phase coming back to the building. Again, it seems to be running a little bit smooth to our somewhat we call our new normal. And then beginning July 6th, which is next week, we have about 50 people coming back as well. From there, what we're doing is now that we have our phased opening, we are looking at a long-term options. It's a lot of what if at this point. We don't know about vaccinations. We don't know when we're going to get a vaccination. We don't know when we'll go down to a threat level 0. And by then, when we go to a threat level 0, what happens? We could go back to what we call our new normal. Some of the things that we are looking into is possible hoteling or hot desking options. We are looking at our telecommute policy more long-term. There are employees that do want to permanently work from home if they're able to have a proper desk set up, because then you do have to look at the ergonomics of their workstations as well. I won't touch on that because that's a whole different webinar. Capital modifications. Everybody has been hit hard, but to be able to look long-term, to be able to see what we have to do here, we are somewhat fortunate and unfortunate that we are a LEED Gold certified facility space. We have an open floor plan. It's great that we got gold certification. However, now that we're doing COVID, all the panels are low. There's no social distance here when you come back to a normalcy. So again, we have to possibly look into putting in some capital modifications to be able to see what our new normal is going to be. And of course, the space needs. Prior to all this happening, we did have a space restriction. We did have about 50 new hires coming in. Our space was maxed out. But now that we are doing long-term telecommuting, there may not be a need for us to be able to call at AI or any real estate company to try to look for buildings or extra space. One of the engagements that we have done with our employees, because they are having some high anxiety, is we created an engagement committee. This committee has been engaging employees and to make them a little bit more comfortable with returning to work. Community groups as well. Community groups, because we do have people such as myself that have a little challenge with being able to work from home and having kids while work from home. There are different tactics that people are doing right now to be able to get by with what they're doing, gardening, stuff like that. So we are able to establish some webinars with getting those groups together to make it a little bit more easier for them. This slide is a sample. You can't really see it, but basically it's more to show you the detail that we have put in with putting together a risk assessment at different levels for each one of our locations. This one pertains to our Paramus office. This highlights on the top row all of our locations. We have a wellness room, we have a meditation room, we have phone rooms, business centers, pantries. And then the column next to it is just a checkbox letting you know, do you have to wear a mask? Do you have to use gloves? Do you have to wash your hands? Are they marked off that you're not able to use them? I can tell you here, ice machines is communal. So no one is allowed to use an ice machine until we drop down to a threat level 0. Kristen, if you could go to the next slide. This last slide, again, is a sample of what we created as a de-escalation plan on all the threat levels. Even though that in the state of New Jersey, I believe that we are at a threat level 1, Suez still remains at a threat level 2. We are a little bit higher. Again, I said it before, we do worry about the health and safety of our employees, so we are being a little bit more conscious of whether or not we want that threat level to be a little bit lower, and also what we want for our employees. Threat level 2 is the screening, the temperature, basically what I discussed in the presentation. So with that said, I will ask Justin if he has any questions or if any of the participants has any questions.
Thank you, Jamie. You touched on the topic briefly. You discussed at length prevention, but maybe you can go back. What is the actual procedure when an employee does test positive for COVID?
So there are CDC guidelines that have been sent out with regards to what to do. I can tell you in the beginning of all this, we did have to vacate the whole building if somebody tested positive. It's not like that anymore. What we decided, again, it has to be a coordination effort with our landlord. we have to make sure that the person is removed. Schools, I know Matt touched upon possibly having isolation rooms. We don't allow that here. We basically just want that person to be sent home, go see their doctor, go get a test, go make sure that it is positive. From there, we just take a look at it on a case-by-case basis, where that person is located within the space, and we caution tape it off in a whether it be a quadrant or an immediate area. If you have the convenience of having to open up windows or doors, that is the biggest advocate to be able to do that. I know with lead, that's not something that's frowned upon, but in this case, this is what we want. So we'll open up the windows, we'll open up the doors, we'll get more outside air, ventilation, and then of course, at the end of the day, we will have somebody come in and desanitize the entire area, and then be able to make sure that the employees are comfortable coming in the next day. We do have to be careful of HIPAA guidelines because we can't use people's specific names, because there are people that like to know who it is and whether or not they had contact with that person during that day. So we just have to be conscious of that.
Understood.
Matt, would you like to touch on any of that I've discussed with regards to the guidelines and cleaning?
Yeah, I think the whole concept of what do we do when someone has a temperature or has symptoms in our workspace or school or building. Again, that's a case-by-case basis. I may have mentioned earlier, I was walking through a school where we were in the nurses station, and the topic was how many students can come into the nurses room. Do you triage them, take their temperature at the door? Do you hand them a face shield? What if you have 2 students with temperatures? This discussion was not only an operational, how to function through this, but it was also a space planning exercise on where can we put them. Typically in a nurse's station, there's a medicine or a small medicine room. We're looking at retrofitting those rooms into isolation rooms, putting glass panes, glass windows in each of the doors and making that an isolation room. What if you have 2 students with temperatures? Is there a backup room somewhere else in the facility? So even though policies and procedures and guidelines are, very much a real effort as we're welcoming people back, I think having that contingency plan in place for your office, your school, your warehouse is important, because not everyone's able to just go home, on the spot. In the case of a school setting, sometimes sick students are waiting for hours for their parents. So that was a very multifaceted kind of layered discussion that's, has to do with the environment, the physical space, as well as the policies and procedures.
Kristen, how are we doing on time for more questions?
I would say we have about 2 minutes or so.
Well, one comment I'd like to make: when we were prepping for this a short time ago, we talked about whether it be Land Associates, Suez, Hansen Associates, people vacation and then coming back to the workplace, whether in-state, out-of-state. It's interesting. Unfortunately, I haven't had a vacation recently, but Matt, you were out of state last week. Jamie, you had some feedback on this matter. Can you guys just give a quick, couple quick thoughts on it? I found it a little shocking, candidly.
Right. I'll take a crack at this first, just because it was very personal. I think taking a step back, I think we all can testify to the concept of Zoom fatigue. Living in this virtual world for the last 4 months, I think we're all comfortable with putting the cameras on now and having video chats. But the amount of back-to-back video chats day after day, week after week has really gotten to me personally. So I've been just doing the conference call thing, and that's helped a little bit. But yeah, I was in the same boat, Andrew. No vacation for 6+ months. I have a family, 3 young kids, a wife. We were all eager to get out of here as soon as possible. So we did go down to North Carolina last week, and midweek the governor issues guidelines on anyone traveling in and out of New Jersey. If you happen to go to a high-risk state, North Carolina being one of them, you are recommended to self-quarantine for 14 days or get tested. So our understanding is that we're self-quarantining, working from home for the next 2 weeks. We drove down, so that was kind of just didn't know if we get stopped at any state borders or kind of what that dynamic was. But when it comes to the workplace, HR did reach out to me, catching wind that there was some new policies or executive orders, and that, it was highly recommended. I was basically told you have to work from home for the next 2 weeks. So I'm fine with that. But there were some discussions about flying as well. I don't know if Jamie, if you dealt with that.
I could tell you from a human resources perspective, we have been getting a lot of questions with regards to if employees did decide to go on a vacation, what the, I guess you could say, repercussions are when they return. New Jersey is a hot spot. I believe that what Matt said, you have to sort of self-quarantine for 2 weeks. We are in the middle of actually putting together some new procedure with regards to what will happen if you did travel to one of the hot states, I guess you could say, or high risk areas. And that's something that we don't have an answer on yet, because we're in the middle of trying to figure out what the procedure will be. But it's certainly been a hot topic, and we are really working hard to try to get a decision on it.
One other comment I'd like to throw out there, Tom, bringing it back to you. We've heard a lot of different things to implement with procedures. James E. Hansen, we've hired a daily porter to walk around, wipe down surfaces and handles and just everything. And that costs money. These additional filters, they cost money. The UV technology costs money. You have to weigh the health and safety of employees and clients, these additional costs. It's a liability, short-term, long-term. Can you give me some feedback on that, please?
Yeah, well, right now, all these, steps and measures are all recommendations. Nothing's set in stone. They're not twisting your arm, making you do any of this, but it is good practice to create this health environment for your occupants. Some are minimal, capital costs. The controls changes, running your HVAC system a little bit longer, maintaining temperature. You're going to see a little bit, of a bump in your utility costs just because you're now, running that system for longer hours and, longer into the day, longer into the summer. So that'll be just a utility bill type increase. Probably not monumental, but again, when it comes to the safety of your occupants and even just a kind of the optics of your building, it's probably money well spent. Filter replacements are relatively inexpensive. Again, that's something that should be reviewed before you go and increase filter efficiency, but relatively inexpensive. Should be, replacing your filters every 3 to 6 months anyway. So going from an 8 to a 13, the cost for that minimal, one over the other. But again, it's just going to be taking a look at the speed. Some of those other air treatment systems, those are probably a little bit more expensive. In terms of you got to buy the equipment, the labor to install it. Are not monumental costs either. Again, like I said, we're putting bipolar ionization in our office here. We have 5 units, and overall, relatively inexpensive. Well worth the cost. The capital cost. For the improved efficiency in cleaning the facility, and again for our staff here. Kind of give them the peace of mind that when they do come back and when they do return, cleaner environment than they left. But again, it's a recommendation. Every one of them comes with a cost associated with it. But I think again, in the long term, your occupants' health and safety outweighs the costs for some of these.
Wow, a lot of great information. Thank you all. Jamie, Tom, Matt, Justin, Kristen, thank you guys. As a follow-up to our webinar, all of today's attendees will receive an email that includes the land brochure, the Suez slide. If you have any questions, feel free to contact any of us. Again, thank you for joining. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.